In this video, I'm going to explain end-to-end in an easy-to-understand manner with as little tech jargon as possible, and show you a step-by-step guide on how you can build your first agentic AI workflow. At the end of it, you'll have a better understanding of end-to-end and be able to start creating workflows yourself. So, let's get started. So, what is end-to-end? End-to-end is a no-code tool that helps you automate things by connecting different apps and services. Imagine you're in a kitchen. Each tool, like a blender, oven, or fridge, does a specific job. In end-to-end, we call these tools nodes. So what are nodes? Well, simply put, a node is a single step in your entire workflow. It can receive, process, and send information. For example, you may have a Gmail node. On its own, it's not going to be able to do a lot. It's only going to be able to help you send an email. Or you may have a Telegram note that helps you send a Telegram message. You can think of each node as a Lego block. You snap them together and you build a powerful machine that works on its own. And a workflow essentially is a chain of these nodes. Once it starts, it runs from start to finish, from, in this case, left to right, like a row of dominoes. Each piece knocks down the next one. You usually begin with a trigger node, something that starts a chain, like a new message on Telegram, or a simple click trigger or a chat message, or a new row in spreadsheet, or form submission. But once triggered, end-to-end flows through each step, just like a recipe, just like a chain reaction, right? Until something errors out or they complete the workflow completely. Now each node has an input, which is what the node receives, and an output, which is what the node sends out. Now imagine it like a coffee machine, right? So you input water and coffee beans, and you output delicious coffee. So each node will receive a certain information as an input and does whatever process that it needs to do and kick out an output. So this is an important concept to have because this is going to be central in the way you work with each of these nodes. There are a couple other things that we need to pay attention to with working with these nodes. And one of them is that the data types, in particular JSON, tables, and schema. So there are three formats in each input and output of the nodes. So let's break this down with as little tech jargon as possible. So JSON is a core format of the code behind the operations on end-to-end. So a typical JSON may look like this. And it's not very easy to look at. It's not very easy to understand for a human. So what end-to-end does very well is being able to represent these code format in two other types of format. And one of the case is the schema format, which indicates which variable each of these content or information falls into. And the other is the table format, which separates out and segregates out all this information nicely, such that it's easy for a human to understand. And the best thing is you can drag and drop and work basically with the variables without having actual coding knowledge and just being able to use the UI to again drag and drop these variables into the field that you need. So when you work with end-to-end, you'll often hear things like strings, arrays, numbers, and boolean, right? So these are basically different data types for each of these information. Now, why are data types important? Well, data type tells your computer or app what kind of information it's working with. So it knows how to store, to use it, and to handle it properly. Think of it like containers. Imagine you're packing things into boxes. Juices goes into bottles, apples goes into crates, and papers goes into folders. So you want to make sure that each of these data types goes into the right containers, so to speak. You wouldn't pour juice into a folder, right? So it's the same thing with computers. They need to know the type of data so they don't mess it up. So the common data types that we have are strings, numbers, boolean, array, and object. Now, the most common type of data that you're going to work with is going to be strings. So these are just strings of text that basically is your alphabetic characters. And then you have your numbers. Boolean, it just has two values, which is either true or false. And then you have the array. So this one's a little bit more complicated because it's a list of strings. And it's oftentimes useful when you're trying to move information in a categorized manner. And then you have object. So these are a more structured type of data where within an object you may have arrays or strings or numbers and a combination, stuff like that, right? But as you get started, probably we will start working more with strings and numbers more than the others. So let's just get into it and try to build our first workflow. So head over to anyden.io and you'll be led to this beautiful looking page. And what you do, this is your first time here, is to click on Get Started, right? And essentially, you'd have to fill in the credentials that you want your account to be associated with. So just put in your full name, your company email. It doesn't have to be a company email. As you can see, you can use your Gmail or your personal email, password of your choice, and of course, pick an account name that you'll remember. So at this point, you don't need to put in any credit cards at all. So you can click on the 14-day trial and get started. So okay, there's a problem with the name that I've chosen. So it has to be, I don't think I can have that underscore there. So let's see. Okay, now that works. And after you filled in all those credentials, you're gonna have to fill in a fun little onboarding series of questions. So you could, this is more for their information. So just pick, whatever that is right for you. But yeah. Boom, there you go. So invite team members, you don't have to do that right now. So you can click on skip. And essentially your workspace is being spun up. And at this point, you can probably take your time to watch a quick start video. That's always helpful. But in this case, we're gonna click on start automating because it is ready. And there we go. So this is the fresh new dashboard that you're going to be led to if this is your first time signing up. And what you want to do is to click on Start from Scratch. But right before we do that, there are a couple of things that maybe you notice on the side panel. This is the overview. This is where basically all your workflow rests. So you may have more than one workflow, right? So just for example, you may have a customer support AI agent workflow as one workflow, and then you may have another legal assistant AI workflow, et cetera, et cetera. And as you get into it, you realize some of these workflows might actually call another workflow as a sub workflow to the main workflow. Of course, that's when things get a little complex. But essentially, these are where you can do your settings. Admin panel is where you get your again, you can change your security settings, you can update your version and stuff like that, but we're not going to get into that on this video. So click on Start from Scratch. And there you are. So this is basically the scratch pad or the workflow pad where you're going to build and basically chain up all these nodes together. So in this case, what you want to be able to do is to create a trigger node, right? Because that is basically the trigger event that you want to trigger the entire workflow. So let's, for this particular case, set a Telegram chat node when I receive a message from Telegram as a trigger for my workflow. So in this case, I will be picking a on message trigger. So there are a few types of triggers, as you can see. There's an on callback query, there's on channel post, edited channel post. So these are different types of trigger events that can trigger the entire workflow. So in this case, I just want to pick the on message, right? So, so here, as you can see, a couple of things to fill in, right? So credential to connect with. Now, what exactly are your credentials to fill in, basically from Telegram? So this is basically the key for your NNN to connect to your Telegram account or to your Telegram chatbot. So now a couple setups that you need to do within your Telegram to make sure that Telegram can actually be connected to NNN. So if you click on create new credential, it's going to ask you for an access token. So this is the access token that you need to go to your Telegram account to create. Now, how do you do that? So just head over to Telegram and essentially search for BotFather, make sure that it's the one with the blue tick, and click on Start. And you want to click on the Create New Bot, right? So at this point, not to confuse the two concepts. Basically, within Telegram, you need to create a bot that lives within Telegram to listen in to the channels or the chats for it to trigger the event trigger in NNN, right? So this bot is not the same bot as what you built on NNN. Now, as you can see, when you type a new bot, it says, all right, you want to create a new bot. How are we going to call it? Please choose a name. So you can say new bot and 8N, AWM. So that's the name. And basically, username is just, usually I would just use the same name with underscore bot. and that usually works. So there you go. So it's as easy as that. The bot has been created. Now, what you wanted was the access token, which is in this case this particular API token right here, and you just click on that, go back to your end and paste that in, and click on save. Boom, there you go. So now you're connected with the Telegram account, right? So in order to make sure that everything's working, how do we check that, right? So what you want to do is click on the little button here called execute step. So now, because this is a Telegram trigger, it's listening to a test event, which you've just prescribed, which is on message. So on message to whom? Well, in this case, it's on message to the bot that you just created in the Telegram, right? So in this case, click on the Telegram link to the bot that you've just created, right? And in this case, basically punched in \start, and then you go back to your Telegram, end, and you'll see that it has received a series of things, right? So going back to what we said earlier, there's always an input and output. In this case, the input is the pull events from Telegram. The output is this whole format of messages or information here. And as we described earlier, there is a schema version of this, there's a table version of this, there's a JSON version of this, right? So, and of course, these are representing the same type of information, just different views or different format of the same information. Now, in this case, if you go to either the table or schema, you'll be able to see that what we've received is the text, which is \start, and all these other information accompanying the input, which is who sent the message and stuff like that. And if you look at the schema, it's the same thing. First name, the sender, which is from, and etc. But what's important is that we're receiving this information here. Okay. Now we've successfully set up basically our first Telegram trigger. Now what we want to do now, let's say for example in this workflow, we want to have the Telegram message be fed into an AI agent. So in this case, we're gonna add an AI agent. Right, so as you're setting up the AI agent, you'll see that it will feed the input of the previous node, which in this case, again, \start, and all the information that's accompanying it. And then what you want to do is you want to define the prompt or the user message to this AI agent. Now, before we go any further, I want to explain the typical architecture of an AI agent. So in any AI agent, there are three things that are important, right? So the first is the chat model, which is the LLM or the large language model. And then you have the memory and the tool. I'm going to explain what it is. So the LLM is essentially the brain of the AI agent. So as you probably heard, ChatGPT, OpenAI, GPT-4, GPT 4.1, these are all large language models that operate as a brain for the AI agent. So you could use that interchangeably. You could use DeepSeek, you could use Anthropic chat model. But in this case, what we will do, we'll just use an OpenAI chat model here, right? And in this case, again, with an OpenAI chat model, you need to create a new credential within OpenAI, right? The reason for that is because every time we use these models, there's a compute power required from OpenAI, right? So in this case, you would need to access what we call an OpenAI API, right? But before we get into that, before we set up the credentials, I want to explain the other two, right? So you have your brain, but it's important also to have a memory, because a memory basically tells the agent of the context of the conversations that came before this particular thread of conversation. So for example, if you say, hi, today is Tuesday, and you say, can you check, what is the current state of the stock market today? So let's say these are three different threads. If you don't have a simple memory attached to, or you don't have any type of memory attached to the AI agent, it's going to forget that today is Tuesday or the previous messages, right? So just like a human being, the operating brain is one thing, but the memory is also as important. So, for example, people with Alzheimer's would probably not have as good of a near-term memory as a normal functioning brain. So in this case, it's the same thing. Memory is important to give you context, while the brain, which is the LLM, is important to process or carry out the task that's required, right? So in this case, when you set up your simple memory, also you want to define below, the simple memory, basically the key is asking for a session ID. Now, session ID, in layman terms, is basically the ID that's going to tell the simple memory the context of that particular session, right? So in this case, the session is the chat. So I'm going to drag this. So this is the great thing about internet, is you can drag things over without having to code it, right? So you're dragging the variable, which is the ID, over here, and basically telling it that that is the session that we're referring to. Now, the context window length is basically how many, as you can see here, is how many past interactions the model receives as context. So in this case, it's 5 interactions, meaning it's 5 chats into the past that it's going to remember and it's going to work within this context. So you can change this to 10 if you like, but usually 5 to 10 is more than sufficient. Now, the third thing is the tool. So tools, so the AI, now great, right? Like the AI agent has an LLM attached to it, has a brain, has a memory, it can respond to you even without any tool. And I'll show you later on how it does without any tool, right? But what we want it to do, or what we want it to be able to do for it to be more useful, is for it to leverage existing external tools like Gmail, for example. This is what make an AI an agent, right? So an agentic AI is an AI that's able to leverage tools that are outside of basically what's native to it, right? So in this case, we're going to attach a Gmail tool. And again, you need to connect all the credentials, etc. In this case, the Gmail tool is simple to set up. You can just sign in via Google. Click on the right account. Check the checkbox and continue. And there you go. Your account is connected, right? So everything else over here. So basically, the field is pretty self-explanatory because tool description, you don't need to care about that. You can set that as automatic. Resources, message operations to send, because we want this tool to be a sending email tool, so it's a send operation. Now, to whom do they send the message? In this case, I'm going to put in my Gmail, because I don't want it to randomly send messages to anybody right now, as we're just testing it out, right? And the subject could be test and it end, right? Email type can be text, and message, we can actually let the AI define what the text is, or we can actually have it as a variable from the AI agent. And I'll show you in a little bit the difference between that, okay? So in this case, we're just going to put defined by the model for now, right? And now that's connected. And let's just go back to setting up the OpenAI credential. So what you need to do is you need to go to platform.openai.com, and you need to click on sign up. So it's going to send me a code to my inbox. There it is. That's a code. Copy that and go back. So just do that. Okay, and just do that. So organization, again, it doesn't have to be an actual organization. It could be you using it personally. What best describes me, maybe somewhat technical or not technical at all, doesn't matter. And you can create organization. Again, inviting your team if you don't work in a team. I'll just skip that for now. And my test key. So this is where you can generate your first N8N, the OpenAI API key, right? So just click on that. Now there you go. So this is essentially the API key that you need to copy and go back to your N8N, create new credential, and you could paste that same API key right here and click on save. There you go. So we've got a green bar there, means it's successfully connected. Now I'll just take 1 minute to explain, for some of you who are not entirely sure what API means, right? So API, or application programming interface, think of it simply as a way that applications connect or communicate with each other. I have a separate video explaining exactly how they work and the concepts behind it, and I'll link that description right below. But essentially, you can think of it as basically this layer where different applications, in this case OpenAI, interact with N8N, and Telegram. How Telegram interacts with N8N was the same thing. You had that API key, right? So it's just a means of communication, and the key is essentially the way where they verify that you are indeed somebody who has the authorized access to that particular OpenAI or Telegram account, right? So it's not just any random person who can just connect their account to your Telegram chatbot or to your API account. So in this case, this is now connected, and you can pick your model basically, right? So within OpenAI, you have GPT 3.5, GPT 4.1, GPT 4.0, and each of these models, they're good at their own thing. But essentially, if we are running a pretty generic operations like craft an email and stuff like that, they're all pretty good. So in this case, we're going to start with GPT 4.1 mini, right? So that is basically the brain that we've specified for this particular AI agent. Now we see an error here, right? So the error is that you always need a prompt for the AI agent. So similarly, for those of you who've used ChatGPT, you would know that you need to prompt it. You need to have an input to the ChatGPT for it to respond to, right? So in this case, what we want to do, we want to drag the text input from Telegram into this field. Now, the reason why we want to drag this input into this field and not just type in, we can simply type in hello or write an email. So, for example, write an email to my manager about my upcoming PTO, for example. So it will still execute that step, and I'll show you, if I execute that, so it's actually sent an email to my manager notifying about my upcoming PTO. So what happens is, and I didn't show you earlier, but you see the ticks here. So essentially, it has actually gone through, basically activating the brain of the LLMs to do that, and send a message through Gmail to basically the email that I specified, which is my own email. So as you can see, it says this message, right? Upcoming PTO notification. Now, so we know that it works if you just type it in. But what we want to do is we want to make sure that every time we type it into the Telegram chat, it's actually showing that text and not the text that I have hard-coded into this field. So what I want to do is change this to expression. Again, there's this difference between fixed and expression, right? So fixed is, again, what I just did, which is a fixed string of text, and expression is a variable, which is like this, which I will drag into this, and it will show exactly the text that is being passed on. So this will change, right, depending on the input of the Telegram. So when it changes, the input will change together with that. So it's just taking into the variable, it's not taking the value as being hard-coded into it, right? So the value will keep changing as long as, it's attached to this particular text variable. So this is why it's important to understand the difference between fixed and expression. In this case, we want to put in the expression into the field because we want to make sure that it's getting what I'm typing into the Telegram chat, right? So in this case, that's why we're dragging that. And another thing you can do is also to add a system message. And the difference between a user message and a system message is that a system message defines what the AI agent is. So for example, if you want your AI agent to be a customer support agent, this is where you want to describe that, hey, you are a helpful customer support agent and your job is blah, 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 right? And it is kind of sort of pre-training it to act according to the task description. So in this case, the system message is just a simple, you're a helpful assistant, but maybe you can say you're a helpful email assistant. Your job is to help user write a professional sounding email, for example, right? So let's just do that. Okay, so that's done. You can send email now, but when he sends an email, as a sender, I don't know if he's already sent an email, right? So what I want it to do is also to send a message on Telegram back. So send a text message back, and this is, yes, operation is send message. And so it knows to use Telegram to send message back, but it doesn't know where to send the message to. So this is why it's important to drag the chat ID from the previous nodes into this particular chat ID. And the text would be basically, 1 second. So this output right here, right? So this is so let me just explain this architecture real quick. So these are the inputs of all the previous nodes, right? So not necessarily just the AI agent node, but also the first Telegram node. So if I open that up again, you have the output of the AI agent, you also have the output of the first Telegram trigger. And if you have more nodes before that, you would have all the outputs of that as well. So you don't necessarily always have to just use the output of the immediately preceding node, but you can use the Telegram trigger output as well. So in this case, I want it to be the output of the agent as a text, because this is basically the agent telling me I've sent an email to your manager. So I want that to be sent to my Telegram so that I don't have to log into end-to-end and look at this message every time I'm asking it to do something, right? So I'm going to click on execute step. And again, it's got an output. The output says text, sure, please provide me, da, da, da. Okay, so that's the output, right? So let's see if it's sending that. There you go. There you go. So we are getting the output now on that Telegram chat. Cool. So so now you have a full workflow of how the Telegram trigger comes in, and it's giving the AI agent the task, and is able to use the Gmail note to send an email, and then also to send a text message back on the same Telegram chat to let you know that it's already sent the email, right? So so to execute the entire workflow, what you typically want to do to make sure that everything flows correctly, you just do a trial. Oops. Okay. So to execute the trigger, and okay, so back here. Hi, please write an email to my manager about my upcoming PTO from 19th to 25th July. Okay, So let's do that. And when you go back here, you can see that it's receiving the message. So in this case, you see that as I run through the execute flow, it's not actually using the Gmail node that is, the Gmail tool that is attached to the AI agent. Now, the reason for that is because I wasn't super clear in describing what it needs to do. So in this case, I would want to add in the system message, use the Gmail tool, attach to send email, okay? For example. So now it should be able to use that. So let me just do the same thing here. So there you go. So it's using the send a message in Gmail text message, right? So now you can see the email about has been sent to your manager. If you need any assistance, feel free to ask. So now if you go back to my email inbox, I should be receiving, there we go, this email. Now, as you can see, there are a couple of issues here because, the subject is still called task n8n, and also, this is not the right email, right? So basically, the reason for that is because the way we set the fields here, right? So we've already hard-coded and said that, hey, the subject needs to be task n8n. So you can change this, or you can let the model define this. So the model will then write whatever subject that it thinks is appropriate. And then the other thing is also only sending to my email. It's because, again, we hard-coded it here, right? So if you let the AI define this, in the Telegram chat, it will ask you, for your manager's email address and stuff like that to put in, right? So those are the things that you can do. And as you can see, sometimes, when you let the AI define sort of the information and the steps that it needs to take, it can sometimes hallucinate and not use the tool or use the tool unnecessarily, which is why it's a good rule of thumb when you're building a workflow is that if it is something that needs to happen every time the workflow runs, you may not necessarily want to attach it as a tool. But what you can do is you can move it over here. Sorry, this is a tool node. But what you can do is you can add a Gmail node instead, send a message. And again, it looks very similar. So the only exception is you can't let the AI, dictate the emails and stuff like that. But you can definitely type it in yourself. And again, we can have an email input and an email kind of variable, email address variable to address who you want this email to go to and drag it onto here. But in this case, I'm just going to put that. And again, subject is also something that, as an output, you can put it in here. But let's say the subject is still task n8n, and the message is the output here, right? So again, this is not the right architecture to put it, but I just want to explain, the difference between having it as a tool and as a node. So when you put it like this, what happens is this is going to be executed no matter what, right? So that you don't leave it to choice, or you don't leave it to chances of whether the AI agent will hallucinate or use the tool. And when you put it like this as part of the workflow, it's just going to execute it as a send message. So it will, no matter what, send a message or send an email before responding to you in Telegram. So that's the difference of attaching it as a tool and having it as a node within the chain, right? So but yeah, so hope that is helpful in explaining kind of the fundamentals of n8n and how to get started on it. If you have any questions, any doubts, please comment below. Ask a question, I'll respond whenever I can. But yeah, do check out my channel for other more complex builds as we go. But I would recommend as a start, just learn how to set things up, learn how things, nodes, and external tools are connected to each other. But yeah, and if you enjoy the content, please let me know and please consider subscribing. And I'll see you in the next one.